Korach was a wise man. Korach, the rebel who fought against Moses and Aaron, proclaiming that they were usurpers, they were charlatans, and they had no right to be the leaders, and everyone is equal, and he wanted to be the leader in their place. And yet, our sages tell us he was a very smart person. How do we reconcile these two things, that they did something so foolish to want to rebel against Moses, chosen by God at Mount Sinai to be the one to transmit God's teachings to the rest of the people? And Moses chose Aaron to be the high priest. It was obviously because God told him to do so. How could Korach be so foolish to rebel against Moses and Aaron and God by extension, and yet be called a wise person? So the answer must be that Korach was not a fool. Korach had a very good understanding of spirituality, and yet he drew the wrong conclusions. He came to a conclusion that he had a right to rebel against Moses and Aaron. What could it be? What is it that Korach saw that prompted him to start the rebellion? This is probably why the Midrash asks the question, what did Korach see? And the Midrash answers, he saw the para aduma, the red heifer, the red cow. Before we get into the red cow aspect of it, we have to understand that when the Midrash asks, what did Korach see? It means to say, we know that he was so smart, he was such a elite individual intellectually and spiritually, and yet he did such a foolish thing. So he must have seen something that others didn't see. And the answer is, he saw the red heifer, the red cow. Now, what does that mean? So this is how some commentators explain it. The red cow is part of a ritual. A person who comes in contact with the dead, either touching a dead body, carrying a dead body, being under the same roof as a dead body, that person is ritually unclean, which means that they have to take a pause from doing things that relate to the holy temple, the Beit HaMikdash. They cannot partake of sacrifices, and so on. Unless after a week of sprinkling the ashes of a red cow on the third day and on the seventh day, if they don't do that, they can never enter the temple. But once they do that, that purifies them. So they would take a red cow, completely red, not even two hairs that are not red. They would slaughter it outside the temple. They would then burn the meat, take the ashes, dilute it with certain plants in spring water, and sprinkle it on the person contaminated. This is the ritual of the Parah Aduma, and that cleanses the person from their contact with the dead. So what does Korach's rebellion have to do with the Parah Aduma? So the commentaries explain like this. What is the reason for this ritual of the Parah Aduma? What is its effect? And how does it take away from the impurity? And the argument goes like this. The Jewish people at Mount Sinai, 40 days later, worshipped a golden calf. So as an atonement for the golden calf, they had to bring this red cow. The cow is like the mother, and the calf is the child. And Rashi quotes Rav Moshe Hadarshan, an earlier sage, who says that it's normal that a mother cleans up the mess made by the offspring. So here too, the red cow removes the stain of impurity brought on by the golden calf. Okay, but then they take this a step further, that Aaron was involved in the creation of the golden calf that necessitated the red cow. What does that mean? That if Aaron had not participated and facilitated the golden calf, there'd be no need for the whole ritual of the red cow. And therefore, when he saw the red cow and the need for this kind of ritual, he looked askance at Aaron and said, how could this man be the chosen person to lead the Jewish people spiritually by being the high priest? So Moses must have made it up himself. But it goes deeper than that. It says in the Midrash, the Talmud actually, that what brought death into the world? Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit. When the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, that removed the impurities brought on by the golden calf, by the sin of the original fruit that was eaten by Adam and Eve. So after Sinai, when the world was cleansed, there would be no death. So how come there's death today? Because when they worshiped the golden calf, that restored the impurity, not totally the way it was in the very beginning after Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit, but it restored it enough to reintroduce death to the world. Therefore, the whole reason, the whole rationale for having to have a purification process for coming in contact with the dead, whose fault was it? It was Aaron's fault. Aaron was the one who brought, indirectly or perhaps even directly by his going along with the people. True, there are reasons why he did that. He did it because he didn't want them to kill him. Then they would never get any atonement for having murdered the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and he was trying to delay, and everything worked out not the way he wanted. But still, he facilitated it, and therefore he's responsible for death and responsible for the need for getting through death by the red heifer ritual. Had he not been involved in that, there would be no need. So when Korach saw the red heifer, he realized that this whole process points to the lack of spirituality of Aaron. And therefore, he said, why should he be the high priest? I'm more qualified. I was not involved in the golden calf. The tribe of Levi was not involved. And he was an elite in the tribe of Levi. And therefore, he felt justified. That's the traditional, conventional way of explaining it. But there might be another and maybe even a deeper way of understanding what the red cow has to do with Korach's justification of his rebellion. After all, Korach was a wise person. How could he conclude that Moses was an impostor, that Moses fabricated the laws of the Torah, that Moses fabricated the commission of high priesthood to Aaron? How could he think of such a foolish thing when God clearly chose Aaron, because God told the Jewish people at Mount Sinai that all the things that God wants us to do will be transmitted through Moses. He's the ultimate intermediary. So how could it be that he chose Aaron and it was something that he made up on his own? So the answer to this is based on the ritual of the red cow. The red cow is referred to in the Torah as a chok, a law that has no rational basis. Could anyone think of a reason for the red cow? It's an enigma. It's an anomaly. It's a paradox. On one hand, the red cow purifies a person from the most severe form of impurity, and yet the people who are preparing this ritual become contaminated. It purifies others, and it contaminates the people who are doing the purification, some of the people at least. Another anomaly, another contradiction, you could say, is that it's referred to in the Torah as a offering, as a sacrifice. Yet it had to be performed outside the temple. So there are a lot of contradictions and paradoxes here, and it's something that we can't understand. And even King Solomon says, I tried to understand this commandment. The wisest of all people tried, and he failed. He says, it's distant from me. I can't figure it out. But yet there was one exception, someone who did know the reason, Moses. Because it says in the Torah, when it introduces the laws of the red cow, which actually appears in next week's parsha, although the commandment for the red cow was given before Korach's rebellion, it's mentioned right juxtaposed to the portion of Korach. There it implies that God was giving Moses the understanding of this commandment. And that's what really bothered Korach. Korach was bothered that, one second, is this commandment a rational commandment? Then how come Moses knows the reason, and I, the brilliant person, I don't have any inkling of why this commandment was given? How could it be that a commandment that's rational, because Moses understands it, could elude me and all the others? On the other hand, if it's trans-rational, Korach believed that there are commandments that are unfathomable, that we can't understand, because he realized that God is above nature, above logic. He says, but if that's the case, how could one person understand it? Either it's above logic or it's logical. There's no third option. At least that's what Korach thought. And what was his mistake? He didn't realize that the same God that transcends logic also transcends beyond logic. What does that mean? That the same God who could be inscrutable. We can't understand it. We can't fathom anything that he says that he doesn't give us the reasons for. But yet, God can make that intelligible to a human being, to many human beings, or one human being. God could take something that is big and put it into something small. The Talmud uses the analogy that's something that you wouldn't even dream about, putting an elephant through the eye of a needle. Unless you put the elephant on a crash diet and you expand the eye of the needle, it doesn't make any sense. How could the elephant be the size of the elephant, nothing has changed, and put it through the eye of a needle? You can't do that. Why? Because two physical things can't find a way of overriding each other's limitations. But yet, God could do it. God could take that elephant and put it through the eye of the needle without diminishing the elephant, without expanding the eye of the needle. And that's something, a miracle that happened every single day in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Mishkan. The ark occupied space. It was a real substantive piece of gold with wood in it. You'd bang your head against it, it would hurt. It wasn't just some type of hologram. And it didn't occupy any space. It occupied space and didn't occupy space simultaneously. That's a contradiction, but God can do contradictions as well. And therefore, the same God that made it impossible for anyone to understand because it's beyond our understanding, allowed Moses to understand. That was Korach's mistake. He didn't realize that that could happen, that the God who is infinite can make himself, his infinity, approachable to that which is finite. That was only true about Moses. When Mashiach comes, we're told that we will be able to understand things that are beyond understanding. For example, there are things about suffering, human suffering. There's no way that a human being could understand suffering, because whatever answer we give, it'll always beg another question. If you say, well, there's a benefit, let's say, the example of someone breaks a leg and misses a flight and that flight crashes. You'll say, you see, it was a good thing for that person to break his leg because it saved his life. But yet God doesn't have to break someone's leg to save him from a crash. God could do it without that. So we're going to have to find a benefit in the breaking of the leg. Then, so, well, the breaking of the leg, the doctors discovered that he had an illness that they were able to treat. It wasn't too late. But why does God have to do it that way? So we can never really understand suffering and pain. But yet when Mashiach comes, we're told we will then be able to understand and comprehend it. If it's incomprehensible, if it's beyond human logic, how is it possible? Because God is not limited to being infinite, just like he's not limited to being finite. Korach didn't realize that. But Korach thought that he was at that level, perhaps, that he could fathom it, because Korach was a visionary. The Kabbalists tell us that Korach was able to see into the future Messianic age. And therefore he thought, if my consciousness is a Messianic consciousness, I should be able to understand even things that are beyond understanding. Maybe others can't, but if Moses could, I should also be able to. He didn't realize that, yes, he was a visionary, but he was still living in the present, and he had certain limitations that Moses did not have.